Eh, Bear with me for a minute. Okay, looks like I'm up on everything now. So I watched this last night, and this movie I had an absolute blast with. Venom 1 came out a couple years back, and I was not a fan because it's one of those situations where I can't stand that you have a Venom movie without a Spider Man connect. I know that in recent years, Eddie Brock and Venom have become anti heroes, and there's even parts of them going out into the West Coast. But the origin story is usually the same. It's always symbiote hijacks arrive from space, bonds with Peter Parker, gains the spider abilities from Peter, bonds with Eddie. Eddie becomes Peter's arch nemesis because of that connect. And the first Venom had nothing to do with that, and it really, really pissed me off. But this one, I went into completely optimistic about. I'm just gonna have a good time watching it. Boy, did I ever! They did amazing with this movie as far as using Tom Hardy's natural charisma. His relationship with Venom is hysterical and is enough to make you want to just watch the movie again. Woody Harrelson's hair is, well, it's weird. It's not as bad as it was in the closing part of Venom, but it's still it's weird. They have Tia Dalma from Pirates of the Caribbean playing Woody Harrelson's love interest. She plays Shriek. Her power is again this one big giant melting pot of Marvel stuff. Her power is just overly powerful sonic waves coming out of her mouth when she screams. As you can see with Venom and Carnage, that's going to be a point of contention considering what their weakness is. But the movie is great. It deals with the duality, Eddie and Venom. They actually argue like an old married couple. When the movie came out, a bunch of people took to it as it being an allegory for the alphabet people movement. And Andy Serkis played it up as saying, as insinuating that they may be in a more than hetero relationship. And I'm sitting there watching, and I'm like, come on. It's a fucking alien. It's a parasite. You're reaching at this point. You're really, really reaching. But they play that up. There's this awesome scene where Venom goes to a club in San Francisco, a rave type thing in San Francisco. Why wouldn't it be San Francisco? And he ends up just vibing and bopping with all these ravers, and they're falling in love with his costume. And the motherfucker ends up with just glow light necklaces all over him. It's hilarious, and he's sitting there just really taking in the um, the culture in San Francisco's nightlife. He gets up on stage and he does a giant speech about how he doesn't need Eddie, and of course, to casual viewer and especially anyone in San Francisco, it's Venom coming out of Eddie's closet, which is an actual line from the movie. The violence, it honestly takes about 50 minutes or so for Carnage to start carnaging. But when he does, it's pretty good. It's not like over the top gory. It's something that Marvel would never allow in one of their movies because they want everything to be, cookie cutter. It's got to be $1 billion friendly. so we can have as much people as possible come to the movie to watch it. Um, Trying to think of any Marvel movie where there's actual violence, like human on human violence. I know in Iron Man 1, Tony Stark killed a few people here and there. And of course, the thing with Ironmonger at the end, that was a human, but he was inside of a suit. Uh, Again, Iron Man 2 was just a bunch of suits. Same with 3. There's no violence amongst civilians, casual citizens, people like that. Even in the Avengers, we hear about it, but there's minimal casualties during the events of the attack on New York. Sokovia's got a few in Age of Ultron, but point is, Marvel shies away from this type of stuff, whereas Sony and Venom and Carnage, they embrace this. Carnage has some really, really good scenes. Uh, Cletus Cassidy is driven by his desire to get back with his girlfriend. Well, his angel, his shining light. He wants to talk to Eddie Brock, and as Brock goes to interview him, he's walking away, and Venom, with a photographic memory, he looks over into Brock, or excuse me, into Cassidy's cell and just Goodwill Hunting's that shit. He just completely memorizes it, and by doing that, him and Eddie, they find a victim of Cletus Cassidy, where they become pretty much local heroes because they've closed the case. The governor of California rescinded their initial decree and said that Cassidy can be put to death. So that's what they try to do. They want to bring in, or Classity, yes. Cletus Classity sends a letter to Eddie Brock inviting him to witness the execution. He wants him to be there since, he's kind of the cause of it. And as he's there, he starts shit talking Brock. And Brock is not really feeling it, but Venom is not really feeling it even less because it's hitting on his anger buttons, and Venom is basically like a child. He lashes out literally and throws Cassidy all around the cell. Cassidy ends up biting Eddie Brock and like tasting his blood, and that's how Carnage comes to be. Carnage, of course, hates his maker and wants to kill Venom. Shriek wants to kill the cop who took her eye out when she was a kid. And Cassidy wants to kill Brock. So you are set up with that as your climax. The cop, which is actually, this was pretty cool considering they don't tie in with the Marvel nonsense as of yet. The cop is later to become Toxin, which is another symbiote. He's the offspring of Carnage. But that was only hinted at. Big, awesome fight at the end of the movie where Carnage reveals himself. Venom cowers down and says, "Oh shit, that is a red one. Bad idea. Let's move. Annie will understand." And he starts controlling Eddie's hand. He's like waving and saying he's going to leave and shit like that. It's really fun. And of course, Eddie does that spot in the trailer where he says, "You need to come out right now. You can eat everybody," and then it's go time. And still, Venom still gets the brakes beat off of him. He's completely outmatched. It takes Dan, who is just human man. He's Annie's fiance, but he's there because Annie's got, you know, she's a white girl, so she's going to become a captive at some point. He's there to help save him. He ends up actually saving Venom. Well, he ends up distracting Carnage just enough. Um, big climactic fight. Brock, Cassidy, they go mano a mano a little bit because the symbiotes vanish because of the sound waves from Shriek, and Carnage just knocks the shit out of her. At which case, Cassidy, that's the love of his life. So now he's pissed off at the symbiote that's giving him these powers. He's not feeling too good about that. Eddie and Venom though are, they're more in sync. So they use that to their advantage. Eddie separates himself from Venom, but also Carnage from Cassidy in a pretty ballsy move. They fall out of the rafters of the cathedral, and there's a really cool chain moment where Eddie's fallen, the symbiote's fallen, and it latches on to Dan, who is hanging, and it goes through him, latches on to Annie, who is underneath him, and then catches Eddie just before he hits the ground, so he has minimal damage. Meanwhile, Cassidy just, the symbiote's trying to crawl over to Cassidy. Venom picks it up and just does his Venom stuff. And that's gone. He picks Cassidy up by the throat, holds him. Cassidy's, giving his last hurrah bullshit of I just wanted to be friends and I'm still a killer and good bad guy stuff. Eddie, who is like, well, look behind me on the picture. That's how Eddie's looking at Cassidy at that point. And all of a sudden, the Venom persona takes over, and Eddie, or Venom, excuse me, goes, fuck this guy, and bites his head off. It's awesome. Now Venom is a fugitive because the cops show up and they find Cassidy dead, Shriek dead, Cop dead, but he's not. There's a priest that's been killed and the church is on fire. So Dan and Annie dip out. They have a amicable split. Eddie is now a fugitive and goes to fulfill an earlier promise to let Venom suck his toes into the sand and shit like that. So they go to a beach. Now, watching the post-credit scene, this is where it gets interesting. The post-credit scene ties things together. It shows them just kind of laying there on a bed, chilling, watching Spanish soap operas, and talking about it. And then Venom decides to big dick and say that he has all this knowledge from tons of universes and it would crush Eddie's little brain and Eddie's, whatever, dude. So Venom decides he's going to show him. And he does. Well, he is going to, but at the time, something happens. Screen starts shaking, and they go from being in like a garbage flea bag motel room into what looks like a classier resort room. And the Spanish soap opera that they were watching is now a Daily Bugle broadcast with J. Jonah Jameson outing Peter Parker as Spider-Man, the Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man. Basically at the end of Far From Home. Venom takes over Eddie, walks over to the TV, looks at Tom Holland's Spider-Man and says, that guy, and then licks the screen. And then there's some comedic stuff with a guy walking in and telling him to get out of the room. But that's it. So what that screen shaking nonsense is now, knowing what we know, is likely Doctor Strange's spell bringing Venom into the Marvel world. Which, this could be interesting. This could be very interesting considering how No Way Home is playing out. Right now, we've seen 5 villains. 2 of them may not necessarily be villains because unless they retcon how they end. So Either way, you're fucking with something. In Spider-Man 2, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, Dr. Octopus doesn't find out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man until the very end of the movie. So that would mean that the spell that Strange cast would have to be pulling him out in like a very small window of time because Otto, like I said, only found out at the end of Spider-Man 2. That's after he kidnaps Mary Jane and before Peter gets there to the docks, which is at nighttime. So Otto's going to be he's going to be pulled out of that universe within that day. Or actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, he doesn't find out until after he's already fought with Peter, and Peter beat the hell out of him. Like he doesn't know that it's Peter until he regains his senses when Peter destroys the inhibitor chip, and Octavia says, "Peter Parker, brilliant but lazy." So again, they're gonna have to screw with some storylines there to do that. Sandman was actually even forgiven by Tobey Maguire's Peter at the end of Spider-Man 3, but the trailer's showing him to be on the side with Electro and Lizard and all that. So Marvel, it's going to be one of those turn your brain off and enjoy it. But they're going to have to retcon the way those villains ended or how they explain how they got here. Because Goblin knew, he pretty much knew who Peter was for the majority of Spider Man. I don't think the Lizard really knew who Andrew Garfield's Spider Man was, but the entire city of New York would have. I mean, there's spotlight on him, cops are all around him. He turns around and looks at Dennis Leary's chief of police and he said, "Peter." And then it's just. Point is, they're going to have to screw with some Spider Man stories to explain how Octavius knew "Hello, Peter" on the bridge in the No Way Home trailer. But you got Venom now as in the Marvel Universe. They're rumored to have a third Venom movie that is. They're actually talking with Tom Holland somehow bring him over to it. And again, this is more contract dispute stuff than anything because Marvel's going to be all in their feelings about stuff like this because they absolutely can't stand that they don't have control over their biggest character. Which is also why they undermine the absolute hell out of Spider Man in those movies. Spider Man has going on now 3 movies by himself, and in every single movie, he's been the cause of all kinds of crap. He's basically been the cause of the villain's plan. Thus far, both of his villains have been Tony Stark created, which I will continue to bitch about till the end of time. Especially if my prediction for this movie comes true, where all of these characters, these evil characters, band together for some evil McMuffin. This evil MacGuffin that Tony Stark has created that they won't, that they couldn't figure out themselves, even though they're goddamn brilliant scientists. I hate the way they done Spider-Man. But this movie, Venom, Let There Be Carnage, very, very good. Woody Harrelson was good in a limited role because honestly, he's not in it that much. Or his speaking role's not that much. It's mainly about Brock and Venom's relationship, which is, again, very good. Hilarious. They beat the shit out of each other. Well, Eddie tries to beat the shit out of Venom, and that goes about as well as you would expect. Because, Eddie's a human, Venom being the alien. There's an awesome part with Anne being taken over by the symbiote again. She sweet talks him, plays to his ego again. Venom is like a child. He's kind of like a 5-year-old with super strength. He acts on impulse and impulse alone. And, can I eat this? No. Why? You just can't. Why? because you can't. Why? This would be the type of conversation that goes on between someone and Venom. Venom just doesn't understand it. He's, as he says in the movie, he is a predator. That's it. That's my thoughts on Venom. Let There Be Carnage. Um, I liked it better than the first one. I don't know how they're gonna go with their Spider Verse with Sony. I know that I've read that they're going to be tying in this with Morbius if that ever comes out, which it keeps getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Michael Keaton might actually die before that movie gets released. But again, spoiler review. If you haven't seen it, don't listen to me. And if you have seen it, then I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did because I really, really liked the movie. Thanks for watching.